Sanders Theatre in Cambridge, WGBH brings you the 1963 Godkin Lectures, sponsored by the Graduate School of Public Administration, Harvard University. This series of 3 lectures is being delivered by Clark Kerr, President of the University of California, and has been given the overall title, The Uses of the University. Tonight's lecture is the last in the series and is called The Future of the City of Intellect. Clark Kerr will be introduced by Don K. Price, Dean of the Graduate School of Public Administration. President Kerr follows Governor Nelson A. Rockefeller of New York in the yearly Godkin Lecture Series. The speaker for next year, for 1963-64, will be Sir Eric Ashby, President of the British Association for the Advancement of Science. The Godkin Lectures, founded in 1903, honor the memory of E.L. Godkin, British-American journalist who founded The Nation and edited the New York Evening Post. As President of the University of California, tonight's speaker, Dr. Kerr, directs the education of over 58,000 students on 7 campuses in the state. Before he became president of the university in 1958, Dr. Kerr was chancellor of the university at its Berkeley campus.
Ladies and gentlemen, one of the more astute political observers of a generation ago used to like to say that the American equivalents of the British House of Lords were the university presidents. They had more or less permanent tenure, if not hereditary privilege, and they were expected to make pronouncements on public policy without any responsibility for doing anything about it. But as President Kerr has been demonstrating in the first 2 of these Godkin lectures, this comparison is now only half right. University presidents are still expected to talk about public affairs, but much more than a generation ago, they are now expected to do something about them. The university president a generation ago could restrict himself to his role of exhortation, as long as the university was restricting itself to its ancient function, the function of providing society with the talent not only for pure scholarship, but also for the professions and other forms of public service. But the newer functions of the university, the maintenance of the elaborate research and service establishments, tie it much more closely to the central political authority that is the source of much of its funds. And as long as the university is aware that more and more what it does influences the shape of our national strategy, the location of industry, and a great many other decisions that used to be outside the range of academic influence, the university president is impelled to do something about public affairs as well as talk about them. So, to offset the obvious growth in the centralizing influence of national politics over our educational system, we have a growth in the influence of our educational spokesmen in those federal decisions that influence universities. If President Kerr is any example, this growing influence may be a considerable force for decentralization. He has not let the massive organization of which he is the head grow in the direction of ever-increasing centralization. The staff of the central administration that he heads, he tells me, has decreased by 70%, while the number of universities he supervises has multiplied. If he can exercise this selective control over the nature of the growth of his great academic empire, it is, I think, clearly because he has understood how to be selective in choosing what he proposes to do in his own work. For years he has been a standing reproach to those who say that they are burdened so much by the pressures of central administration that they can never find time to think. Since becoming chancellor at Berkeley, he has continued his active scholarship, joined in the writing of a couple of books, and now he has amply confirmed the judgment of his friends in the Faculty of Public Administration at Harvard that he could find time to prepare a series of Godkin lectures and make them into a first-class volume. If institutions like universities can, by taking thought, I should say universities and nations, avoid the tendency to yield to the automatic pressures in the direction of centralization, it is only because the heads the individuals who head them think that way. In these lectures, President Kerr has already shown that he has not only found a way himself to preserve the independence of his own intellectual activity in the face of tremendous administrative demands on his time, but he has also seen the broader problems of the universities of the nation as they have developed in this era, when the pressure of wars and massive technological development and rapid social change are thrusting duties on the universities that they never expected to carry. And he is showing us some of the ways in which they, meaning all of us in the university world, can carry our new responsibilities without deserting our primary obligation to the historic purposes of a university. I am therefore especially happy to present to you Dr. Clark Kerr, President of the University of California, who tonight gives the third and final Godkin Lecture for 1963 on the future of the city of intellect. President Kerr.
Dean Price and ladies and gentlemen, Dean Price in the introduction said that university presidents used to be compared with members of the House of Lords with permanent tenure. This must have been a long, long time ago, because the statistics today show that the average college and university president has a tenure of 3.5 years. And I might say there are some days that seems much too long. The last two lectures we've been talking about the development of the modern American university and the impact on it of the massive federal aid of the past 20 years. Tonight, we look into the future, try to see what it may hold, and engage in some speculations. These speculations will be about the near future, the history of the next decade or so as it affects the universities. Now realize that this is somewhat dangerous. Remember one time when Sir Charles Darwin, the grandson of the author of The Origin of Species, had just written a book called The Next Million Years. And he came to the United States on a lecture tour, and among other places he ended up at California. And I asked him how it happened that he was going to predict 1,000,000 years ahead. I'd heard people predict the weather tomorrow or the politics of the next election, but 1,000,000 years. He said he had done that because it was absolutely safe, that nobody could possibly prove him wrong about what was going to happen 1,000,000 years hence. And he said anybody was foolhardy to make predictions about the next week, the next month, the next year, the next decade or so. His prediction, incidentally, for the 1,000,000 years ahead was that by that time all the raw materials of the world would have been used up for a long time, and the world would go back to more or less the state that Hobbes once described in his Leviathan, where life was nasty, brutish, and short, and where only the cruel and the mean could survive. So introducing him on his idea of the next 1,000,000 years, I gave my own versions of what was going to happen 1,000,000 years from now, and I had two of them. One of them grew out of some experience in the field of industrial relations, and having read Elton Mayo and knowing about the Harvard School of Business Administration and Human Relations and how everything could be done in such a nice and pleasant way. And I put that together with some experiments going on at the University of California at a Richmond field station, where they had found that they could put raw sewage into a tank, feed algae into it, and out of it, with the sunlight playing on these algae tanks, get good food and also water. The professor involved would actually drink the water coming out from the other end of the tank at the same time that he was scooping out the algae. So I dreamed up this vision of the world 1,000,000 years from now. That by then population had expanded enormously, and if the raising of algae was the most efficient way of using sunlight, the world was going to be completely covered with algae tanks all around the world. There was no point looking back in history. It was algae tanks as far back as you could go. No point thinking about the future. It was more algae tanks. No point traveling. It was algae tanks all around the world. Now, when you had these little colonies of people living in this self-sustaining process on the top of these algae tanks, obviously you couldn't have very much trouble. And as a consequence, you would have to have, in my vision of the eventual world, you'd have to have all of these algae tanks run by graduates of the Harvard School of Business. And this was the utopia a million years from now. I, however, just shortly before that, had become chancellor of the Berkeley campus and got involved in some library problems, and discovered a fact which I hadn't known before and which rather startled me. And that was that the number of titles of books in the world doubles every 16 or 17 years. The number of copies goes up faster than that. Now, we all know that it's a law that you may never destroy a book. You may never throw a book away. So I had this vision of the end of the academic process. And it kept on going, and more books were published, none of them were thrown away, until the whole world was a series of library shelves. And there were only 3 people left. And the third from the last person was a professor at a university, and he wrote the last book. The second from the last person was a printer who printed it. The last person was a librarian who placed this last book on the last empty spot on the last shelf, and then in the self-effacing manner of librarians committed suicide. And this was the world a million years from now. Now, this evening we'll be talking about the nearer future than that, running more risks, but my predictions will be rather minor predictions and no great risk in them. The title this evening of my remarks is The Future of the City of Intellect. The true American university, as David Starr Jordan once said, he was the founding president of Stanford University, he observed that it lies in the future, and it still does. For American universities have not yet developed their full identity, their unique theory of purpose and function. They still look to older and to foreign models, although less and less. And the day is coming when these models will no longer serve at all. The American university is currently undergoing its second great transformation. The first occurred roughly during the last quarter of the 19th century, as we've discussed the last 2 evenings, when the land-grant movement and German intellectualism were together bringing extraordinary change. The current transformation will cover roughly the quarter century after World War II. The university is being called upon to educate previously unimagined numbers of students, to respond to the expanding claims of national service, to merge its activities with industry as never before, to adjust to new intellectual currents. By the end of this period, there will be a truly American university, an institution unique in world history, an institution not looking to other models, but serving itself as a model for universities in other parts of the globe. This is not said in boast. It is simply that the imperatives that have molded the American university are at work around the world. Characteristic of this transformation is the growth of the knowledge industry, which is coming to permeate government and business, and to draw into it more and more people raised to higher and higher levels of skill. The production, distribution, and consumption of knowledge in all its forms is said to account for 29% of gross national product, according to Mocklup's recent study. And I refer to Fritz Mocklup of Princeton University, and currently the president of the American Association of University Professors. And knowledge production is growing at about twice the rate of the rest of the economy. Knowledge has certainly never in history been so central to the conduct of an entire society. What the railroads did for the second half of the last century, and the automobile for the first half of this century, may be done for the second half of this century by the knowledge industry, and that is to serve as the focal point for national growth. and the university is at the center of the knowledge process. I turn now to what I call the rise of Ideopolis. University centers have a tendency to coalesce. And quoting now Alan Nevins, the famous historian, observers of higher education can now foresee the inexorable emergence of an entirely new landscape. It will no longer show us a nation dotted by high academic peaks with lesser hills between. It will be a landscape dominated by mountain ranges. The highest peaks of the future will rise from the highest plateaus. One such plateau runs from Boston to Washington. At the universities and laboratories situated along this range are found 46% of the American Nobel Prize winners in the sciences and 40% of the members of the National Academy of Sciences. A second range with its peaks runs along the California coast. C.P. Snow has written recently, and now the scientific achievement of the United States is moving at a rate we all ought to marvel at. Think of the astonishing constellation of talent, particularly in the physical sciences, all down the California coast, from Berkeley and Stanford to Pasadena and Los Angeles. There is nothing like that concentration of talent anywhere in the world. It sometimes surprises Europeans to realize how much of the pure science of the entire West is being carried out in the United States. Curiously enough, it often surprises Americans too. At a guess, the figure is something like 80% and might easily be higher. The California mountain range has 36% of the Nobel laureates in science and 20% of the members of the National Academy of Sciences. The Big Ten in Chicago constitute a third range of academic peaks, with 10% of the Nobel laureates and 14% of the members of the National Academy of Sciences. These three groupings of universities currently produce over 3/4 of the doctorates conferred in the United States. Another range appears to be in the process, or at least may be in the process of development, in the Texas-Louisiana area. The concentration of talent partly follows history, the location of the older private and public university. Partly it follows industrial strengths and population centers, but it also has its own logic. No one university can cover all specialties, or cover them well enough so that there is a sufficient cluster of close intellectual colleagues. The scholar dislikes intellectual isolation, and good scholars tend to swarm together. These swarms are extraordinarily productive environments. No library can be complete, nor any graduate curriculum. Some laboratories, to be well used, must be used by more than one university. Thus, the Big Ten in Chicago, through their Committee on Institutional Cooperation, are merging their library resources, creating a common market for graduate students, diversifying their research laboratories on a common use basis, and parceling out foreign language specializations. Something similar is happening in the University of California system and between Berkeley and Stanford. Harvard and MIT, Princeton and Pennsylvania, among others, run joint research enterprises. So many of the hopes and fears of the American people are now related to our educational system, and particularly to our universities. The hope for longer life, for getting into outer space, for a higher standard of living. Our fears of Russian or Chinese supremacy, of the bomb and annihilation, of personal loss of purpose in the new world. For all these reasons and others, the university has become a prime instrument of national purpose. This is new. This is the essence of the transformation now engulfing our universities. Central also is the new connection of the university with the rise and fall of industrial areas, the rise and fall of industries. A most intense inter-university and inter-regional competition is developing, unmatched in history, except perhaps by the universities and their lender in 19th century Germany. It is often through new academic specialties and through athletics, that the universities seeking to rise in the academic hierarchy can most quickly and easily attract national attention, and also by hiring great and visible academic stars. The mark of a university on the make, and there are quite a few of them, is a mad scramble for football stars and professional luminaries. The former do little studying, and the latter little teaching. And so it makes a neat combination of muscle and intellect. With these national, industrial, and academic pulls upon them, universities need to be quickly responsive to opportunities, readily adaptable to change, yet they are basically conservative institutions. And I should now like to turn briefly to the subject of the problem of change within a university, a problem that every academic administrator deals with, under the heading Evolution and Conservation, the twin imperatives. The university's gate of Janus leads inward as well as outward, and inside the gate, the social landscape changes remarkably. When Janus looks toward the ivory tower, he sees a different wonderland. Here, to get somewhere, you must run twice as slow. And this is as it must be. The university as an institution needs to create an environment that gives to its faculty members a sense of stability. They should not fear constant change that distracts them from their work. A sense of security. They should not need to worry about the attacks against them from outside the gate. A sense of continuity. They should not be concerned that their work and the structure of their lives will be greatly disrupted. A sense of equity. They should not be suspicious that others are being treated better than they are. Inventiveness should be left to the individual faculty member within the protection and solidity of the surrounding institutional structure. Galileo, within the conservative institution of Padua of his day, Erasmus at Oxford and Fribourg, Newton at Cambridge, helped start the enormous metamorphosis from which the modern world emerged. But their institutions, as institutions, were stolidly changeless. I should like, first of all, to discuss the role of the collective faculty in the change which goes on within a university. And here again, I should like to clearly distinguish between the impact of the collective faculty and the individual faculty member. The individual faculty member is often the great source of what is new, the collective faculty quite to the contrary. And the heading that I have for this section is called the status quo. And I start out with a quotation taken from a little volume by Cornford, which I think is the cleverest thing that I've ever seen about academic life. He was a classicist at Cambridge around the turn of the century, when Cambridge was stirring with responses to the modern world. And his observation of the collective faculties at Cambridge gave rise to this as the basic rule of a faculty. And it went as follows: nothing should ever be done for the first time. He said if you had to do something for the first time, there was a subsidiary rule. He said nothing is ever done until everyone is convinced that it ought to be done, and has been convinced for so long that it is now time to do something quite different. It is true that within the collective faculty, there tends to be what might be called a guild mentality, or what C.P. Snow calls in his appendix to the masters, the faculty as a sort of a club. This guild attitude, which is predominant within the collective faculty, I think almost every place, does have something of a counterpoise among some faculty members with what might be called the socialist view of the university, concentrating not so much on the internal guild and its rights and privileges, but rather on service to society. And this makes some faculty members rather ambivalent about change. As members of the guild, they're against it. From the more socialist point of view, they may favor it. The individual faculty member, and particularly the political liberal on the faculty, is often torn between the guild and the socialist views of the university. The guild view stands for self-determination, for resistance against the administration and the trustees. The socialist view for service to society, which the administration and the trustees often represent. The guild view is elitist toward the external environment, conservative toward internal change, conformist in relation to the opinion of colleagues. The socialist view is democratic toward society, radical toward change, and more nonconformist. And the political liberal is drawn toward both views. And there is a paradox. Few institutions, I might even say no institutions that I have ever come across, are as conservative as the universities about their own affairs, and their members as liberal about the affairs of others. And sometimes the most liberal faculty member in one context is the most conservative in another. The door to the faculty club leads both in and out. Next, I should like to turn to what I call the status quo ante. This has to do with the alumni and the students. If the collective faculties represent the present, the collective alumni represent the past, as much the best of the past as the faculty the best of the present. The alumni are oriented toward their own undergraduate days. There seems to be a rising sense of alumni concern as the rate of change rises. Generally, is over the preservation of an emphasis on teaching as against research, of the beauty of the old campus as against the asphalt and concrete and glass of the recent improvements. You may be able to think of an illustration or two. Of the quality of remembered undergraduate life in its totality, of the old admission requirements which let the old grads get in, of athletic teams that never lost a game, of the spirit of the halls of ivy as against the technological materialism of the federal grant university, of the integrity of the old alma mater against the blandishments from Washington. The older and the smaller and the more private and the more distinguished the university, the greater the intensity of these alumni concerns. The alumni are concerned. The undergraduate students are restless. Recent changes in the American university have done them little good. Lower teaching loads for the faculty, larger classes, the use of substitute teachers, teaching assistants, teaching associates, lecturers, and so forth for the regular faculty. The choice of faculty members based on research accomplishments rather than instructional capacity. The fragmentation of knowledge into endless subdivisions. There is an incipient revolt of undergraduate students against the faculty. The revolt that used to be against the faculty in loco parentis is now against the faculty in absentia. The students find themselves under a blanket of impersonal rules for admissions, for scholarships, for examinations, for degrees. It's interesting to note how a faculty intent on few rules for itself can fashion such a plethora of them for the students. Yet the students also want to be treated as distinct individuals. The faculty looks on itself as a guild. The undergraduate students are coming to look upon themselves more as a class. Some may even feel like a lumpen proletariat. Lack of faculty concern for teaching, endless rules and requirements, and impersonality are the inciting causes. The big state universities are the most vulnerable to charges of neglect of the students. The private universities, tied more to tradition, to student tuition, to alumni support, to smaller size, have generally far better preserved their devotion to undergraduate life. If federal grants for research brought a major revolution, then the resultant student's sense of neglect may bring a minor counter-revolt, although the target of the revolt is a most elusive one. Next, I should like to turn to the process of change coming from the outside under the heading coup d'etat. The major changes in university life have been initiated from the outside. Popes, emperors, dukes, and burgomeisters early became involved in establishing and governing universities. The truly major changes have been wrought by Napoleon in France, ministers of education in Germany, royal commissions and the University Grants Committee in Great Britain, the Communist Party in Russia, the Emperor at the time of the Restoration in Japan, the lay university governing boards and the Federal Congress in the United States, and also in the United States by the foundations. As we look ahead, prospective changes can be identified in part by the interests of the external initiators, trustees, state governments, foundations, industry, the federal government. What are the current concerns of these groups? There are problems related to costs, identified particularly by Beardsley Rummel in his little volume called Memo to the College Trustee. Things like faculty-student ratios, fuller utilization of the calendar, excessive numbers of courses, mechanization of instruction. Problems related to accommodation of the vast numbers of young people already knocking on the doors. Problems related to public service, cultural programs, urban extension, advice to state and federal legislators and agencies. Problems related to the supply of trained personnel for industry and the public, particularly engineers, scientists, and doctors. Questions about the quality and availability of research, particularly the establishment of additional university research centers. Problems related to the exploitation of new discoveries, particularly in the biological sciences, and spreading out into health sciences and agriculture. The external origin of changes raises very grave problems. How to identify the good and the bad, and how to embrace the good and resist the bad. There is also a problem of timing. How to adjust not too rapidly and not too slowly. And there is the problem of how to change the content of the university without changing its essential forms. These obligations to select the good and reject the bad, to pace the rate of change, to discover the methods of change that will do the least damage to traditional processes, fall primarily on the reluctant shoulders of the administrator. And as Cornford remarked, to quote him again, in giving advice to the young administrator beginning his career, he said, "You think, do you not, that you have only to state a reasonable case, and people must listen to reason and act upon it at once. It is just this conviction that makes you so unpleasant." There are two great cliches about the university. One maintains it is a radical institution, when in fact it is most conservative in its institutional conduct.